Welcome to the show. My name is Charlton with Big C. This is Charlton and Big C Sports coming to you worldwide on the iHeartRadio network. And today is a beautiful Black History Month, February the 24th, 2017. We also want to say bienvenidos to all of our listeners in Latin America. Thank you for following Big C Sports, the number one sports show in the universe, and according to iHeartRadio, they're the number one media company in the United States, of course, across the pond in Paris, France, as well as London, England. Thank you for following Big C Sports. And you know we love you, Canada. Big C, I don't think there's anyone I love more than Canada, than the land of the free and the home of the brave. You good old boys down south. How's it going for you good old boys, Big C?
Down in the southern part of the United States, spring training is getting going with all the baseball teams down in Florida. Everybody swinging the bat there where we can knock away a couple of these early spring mosquitoes and stuff.
Yeah, you sure it's mosquitoes, Big C? it might be birds looking for a way to get out of the water, because I think you guys sent the water from back south out here to the West Coast. All of the lakes are full. In fact, coming up here to the University of Nevada, and they're one of the top teams in their conference in basketball. And there's also some conventions going on for coaches that we cover with our sports company, Big C. So I do want to say that today's segment is sponsored by your Northern California Cadillac dealers, home of the all-new Cadillac Escalade, the standard of the world. And when you go by and test drive yours, tell them Charlton and Big C sent you. Big C, I don't know what it is, but I'm telling you, everyone in Nevada has a dirty Escalade. I see a lot of Escalades and other lesser-type vehicles, but they're all dirty, Big C. I think you've caught on, or either Mother Nature's caught on. Which one is it, Big C?
Well, things trending. We hear all the time about what's trending.
Yeah.
We know that the dirty Escalade is trending. It's not dirty. It's cultured.
Yeah, it's cultivated.
So, people understand that. People want what's hot. I mean, we're fashionable.
Yeah.
That's all it is. We're fashionable.
That's so funny, Big C. But there's so much going on in the world of sports. The NFL is always a hot topic. No one can really get out of the NFL talk, because there's always, who's going to go where and who would make the biggest impact as a wide receiver or as a running back, Big C. In fact, there is some news out there. When you look at running backs, a guy by the name of Adrian Peterson, I think he tore up his knee twice, Big C, but he came back just as strong. And I guess he and Minnesota, that love affair might be a little bit over. Where would he make the biggest impact in your thoughts, Big C?
Well, we're talking $18 million to make you stop loving your running back.
Yeah.
That's what they look at. But, I look at Adrian. I still think Adrian has good 2 solid years left in him, Charlton.
Yeah.
Being in the right organization. And when you want to look at the right organization, you look at the team in the NFL that's lost the most in the last 2 years when I have the dominating running back. And I got to look at Seattle out west, Charlton.
Yeah.
Where they lost beast mode.
Oh, yeah.
That type of running style. Take on any and everybody.
Yeah.
Adrian Peterson, same type of guy. And I think the maturity of an Adrian Peterson would allow him to take lesser money and go to an organization that's there to win right now. And Seattle's built to win right now, Charlton. When you look where the Seahawks have been in the last 4 years in the NFL.
Yeah.
This is not a depleted program. This is a program that Pete Carroll has kept consistent. And to have a healthy Russell Wilson, I think, going into training camp this year versus what they had at the start of last season, would make a world of difference. But to have the maturity of an Adrian Peterson, a back who will run, block, as well as receive, Charlton, would really elevate the offense in Seattle and make them the top contender in the NFC once again, Charlton.
And you remind me when you talk about Adrian Peterson, played his college football at Oklahoma, and they've had so many great running backs over the years, going back to Marcus Dupree, and also, who's a favorite one? Yeah.
Billy Sims. And let me give you one before Billy Sims, Charlton. They had a Heisman Trophy winner before Billy Sims, a guy named Steve Horn.
Okay.
So they've had 2 Heisman Trophy winning running backs in Oklahoma long before Adrian Peterson and Billy, Marcus Dupree.
Yeah.
These guys have been a factor of running backs. They got 2 running backs right now. One's going to come out, Joe Mixon, into the draft this year.
Yeah.
And they got Beeline, who will be coming out next year. So this has been a factory for NFL of running backs, Charlton.
Well, with all the talent, and we know it's a stupid question I'm going to ask, but it won't be the first one, Big C, that I've asked on Big C Sports.
People don't know you like that.
I understand, Big C. I understand that. It's the moonshine, baby. It's the moonshine. But with all of the athletes that Oklahoma has had, number one, how do they get them to come to Norman, Oklahoma, as opposed to going to Austin, Texas, or going to Miami or USC, UCLA, or even you think about teams like, Michigan or Ohio State, but they never really win the big game. They don't win the national championship. They're always put in the top 10. Is Stoops still the guy for them? He's not like Barry Switzer that seemed to be always in the Rose Bowl. But what is it about that program that they have NFL caliber running backs going back 20 and 30 years, Big C? But I think they only have one national championship to show for it since they beat Penn State back in the '85 Orange Bowl, Big C.
Well, Charlton, you just have to look at college football, the landscape, how it has changed really over the last 20, 25 years.
Yeah.
When they had the reduction of scholarships across the board, no longer could the huge universities, stockpile players where you could have 150 players on scholarship. Now you're down to 75.
Yeah.
So the playing field is equal. So, and everybody's on television. I think you were on television 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't tell anybody.
but everybody's on television. I remember when I was being recruited, the big thing was, we got 3 TV games this year. 3 national televised games.
Yeah.
Universities, that was a selling point to students when you had to go across country and your family could not get to your games, mobility-wise. It wasn't like it is nowadays that anybody could catch a flight. So that was a big drawing appeal to the university.
Wait, hold on. Did you say not anyone can catch a flight? How would you know? You've always flown around in private jets. What do you know about trying to catch a flight, Big C? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to reveal the recruiting tactics of some of the people in the Southern Conference. My bad. But speaking of recruiting, I want to say this segment, but it's sponsored by the California Lottery. What can a buck do for you? Not too many people are excited. There's only about $60 million for tonight's Mega Million, Big C. $60 million is not a lot, enough for a lot of good old boys to get out of bed. But if they say half the money goes to the schools, and I keep saying we won, but I want to ask you, since that Powerball of $400 million was won, Big C, has anyone heard from the great Larry Bird, Big C?
Yeah. Everybody's looking around and thinking Indiana for Larry Bird at the moment. We got to worry about what the Birdman is working on.
Yeah, that's funny. And ironically, I saw an article in the USA Today. They were talking about the great, Magic Johnson had a picture with him and the great Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Big C, and we've been talking about that over the last couple of days on the program, with Magic making moves for Los Angeles with this big contract that's going to be increasing for everybody in the next couple of seasons. I think he'll have the Lakers back on top in about 3 years, at least competing for playoffs, maybe in the next 2 years. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, the thing is, Charlton, is going to be how savvy he is with moves that he makes. He's going to need to go out there and get a veteran player, Charlton, that can dominate the team.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about just scoring, but just dominate the team, who has that presence that all these young players look up to, Charlton, who's been this player in the league, an all-star or whatever. But he has that, majesty when he walks onto the court that you will listen to him.
Yeah.
That's what the Lakers like now. It's a lot of me young guys. I mean, it's like a high school AAU team put together in Los Angeles. Very talented, lack of direction. And you have a coach that doesn't know how to mold that stuff, Charlie, because he doesn't have enough leadership ability in the NBA. He doesn't have the years behind him being seasoned. And that's what they lack. And that's what Magic will help the coach along with if they keep walking in there. But they need to go out and get that established veteran player, Charlie, that's been an all-star.
Yeah.
He doesn't even have to be a young guy. He's just been an all-star in the league. So when he talks and walks the walk, everybody will listen to him.
Oh, yeah, definitely everybody will listen. And I want to even just get back into the world of football. We were talking about Adrian Peterson, and there's some people who are thinking maybe the Broncos or the Chiefs should skip on Tony Romo. Now, if you can tell me what they've seen in his 12-year career, I think he's won one playoff game, maybe two. I might have missed one of them, but that's not a big winning percentage and not a lot to put a lot of money into a guy who's broken up every year at your starting quarterback position. Maybe keep him as a backup if you're so happy to see him on the sidelines. But would you put franchise money, or let me just say Brock Osweiler type money, into a guy like Tony Romo, Big C? We see what he's already washed up in Dallas. How could he go elsewhere and revitalize his career, Big C?
Well, Charlton, you said two cities, Kansas City and Denver.
Yeah.
And I think we both saw games late in the season in both of those cities where it was in the teens.
Yeah.
It's called real cold. Yeah. Okay? That's not playing at Jerry's place.
No AC.
Okay?
Yeah.
And especially when you have Brett Romo.
Yeah.
And Tony Romo's been known for having that the last 5 years of his career.
Oh, yeah.
He could not survive in one of those cities, Charlton. And it's nice to have fanfare with a veteran quarterback. I mean, Peyton Manning stood the test of time.
Yeah.
When he made that move from Denver, from Indianapolis.
Yeah.
But it was a special situation. But we also saw how fast he deteriorated, Dolphins.
Yeah.
That was one of the things people don't want to remember. Yes, he came out and lit the world on fire with an MVP season, 5,000 yards, 50-plus touchdown passes. But he deteriorated so quickly after that, Dolphin. 2 seasons later, he only had half of those numbers.
Yeah. I tell you what,
the ball down the field.
So there's always this infatuation, with love, and always some guy, they want to go back to what you used to be. It's almost like trying to find that girl you met back in high school, but that was when you were young, before your frontal lobe developed. Now that it's developed, you're not really looking for the same thing, but they keep hoping they can take that old moonshine that you poured out, Big C. You know how you pour. Now, do you even pour it out, or you just drink the whole thing, Big C? Which one do you do?
The bottom of the glass. That's called a starter base.
Okay. I would be remiss if I didn't just bring up a little bit about POTUS. I'm up here in Nevada, which I believe is a big Republican state. Okay, but what I saw in some of the local media is they're saying, how sports and politics mixes together. We talk about sometimes things happen in life and why people do what they do, but it's saying that private prisons are banking on Donald Trump. Now, here's a guy that said he's going to make America great again, but the private prisons are banking on this immigration thing because they want to make these new immigrants the new prison industrial complex. A lot of them don't have rights, may not have an attorney, so when they're saying they're sending them back to Mexico, Mexico doesn't want them, so sometimes they may end up in an incarcerated state of mind because they don't have the money to bail them out, especially if they're trying to cross the border on feet with a backpack. Big C, your thoughts on the prison industrial complex and this border wall that POTUS wants to build to make America great again? Your thoughts, Big C?
Well, you're talking about creating jobs, Charlton, and if you incarcerate people, how many level of jobs do you create? So he's opening it up, but that's wrong to incarcerate people for financial gain.
Yeah.
But that's what you're looking at, the new industrial prison complex.
Yeah.
Incarcerating people who came into this country for financial gain. You can deport them, Charlton, but in deporting them, you can't go out and say, well, I created jobs, because they got the same level of employment with deportation service.
Well, let me ask you a question.
The prison, Charlton, I can employ 6,000 people at the prison.
Well, let me ask you this question, and this is a question that you'll probably only hear on Big C Sports. Are they going to try to lock up any Caucasian person that's been out there for whatever reason doing the same junk, the same garbage, maybe have a violation or breaking the law or grabbing some woman by the crotch, and that's called assault? Are they going to be locking up those Caucasian men? In fact, he fits that profile. Are they looking for people that do what he does, Big C? And that's real talk, Big C. Your thoughts?
Charlton, when we look at all Eastern Bloc, Caucasian men, those things won't happen. The Russians, the Ukrainians, those people will be able to come into this country and do whatever. They talk about mafia and drug trafficking.
Yeah.
The Russians do as much of that in America as any Mexican cartel.
Yeah.
But they never talk about it. When you talk about the Italian cartels, no one's talking about them. It's only the Mexican cartels. So you're going to tell me only the Mexicans with their mules bringing the drugs into America versus the Italians and the Eastern Bloc Europeans with their planes and boats.
Yeah.
You don't look at those.
Ironic.
It's easy to deflect on one culture of people, Charlton, because you've built up such a hatred towards them.
Yeah.
Because maybe they won't do the business with you in Mexico that you wanted to do over the years when they do it in those Eastern Bloc countries. That's where the real where's the heroin coming from, Charlton?
Yeah.
It's not coming from Mexico.
Yeah.
That's coming from the Middle East. That's where, but it's coming through Europe to get here, Charlton. So when he talks about these things, he needs to be more clairvoyant with the public. Eventually, they'll catch on. You can only be a fool for so long.
Yeah.
To the same lie.
Yeah.
They'll say, I'm pretty, but you haven't seen anybody else.
Yeah, that's funny, Big C. And I bring that up because when we talk about drugs, who would you think uses the most drugs in the United States? Would it be people who don't have money and no jobs, or people with lots of money and lots of jobs, Big C? Which one would it be?
Well, Charles, I'm going to say the people who can afford it.
Okay.
The most of it.
Now let me bring
If you look at Wall Street, Wall Street for years has been known as cocaine knowledge.
Yeah.
But they don't use crystal meth, so they can go to, as they say, counseling or rehab, Charlton?
Yeah.
You ever go to a drug rehab center, Charlton, and see how many non-minority people are in there?
A lot of them are.
They're all in the drug rehab facility. But if you go to a jail, Charlton, see how many white people are in there on drug-related scenarios, Charlton.
Yeah.
It's vice versa. You incriminate those who are non-Caucasian for drug paraphernalia, Charlton, but those that are Caucasian, to get them in the drug rehab. And I don't care who's listening to the program, you know that I'm correct in the statement.
Oh, it's true.
Go to any drug rehab facility. Look at the populace and ethnicity in this facility.
Yeah.
And you be like, wow, I mean, I know people, Charlton, that have sent their kids to these facilities.
Yeah, okay? So do I.
But their kids. But their kids are not African American.
No.
You know, they go in, they spend their 6 weeks, 6 months, whatever. They're right back out, I'm clean. 3 weeks later, they get ready to go back again.
And see, that's
They're clean as long as they can't get their hands on it, Charlton.
Yeah, and see, that's important to bring up because we're having these awards all over Hollywood, and they're talking about who's going to win an Oscar and how many people are nominated, and that's where people have the money and the wherewithal to do whatever they want to do, but you really hear about people of that stature being incarcerated. I just want to bring this one more thing up because Donald Trump, he owns sports teams, and we just caught him golfing just a couple of weeks ago with Rory McIlroy down at his course Mar-a-Lago down in Florida. But you look at Bannon and Priebus, they're like Donald Trump. I think Bannon obviously tells Trump what to do, but they're having this war against the media for people who read. So they're trying to tell people who read that don't trust the media, but this prison thing and this making the Native Americans, we saw what happened with that, with the Indians being locked up in concentration areas, and now they all have their own little area of land that they gave back as far as reparations. Now they're doing the same thing to Mexicans. We saw what happened to African Americans. And I think in sports, we got to talk about this because a lot of people who play sports, whether it's soccer or whether it's baseball, they're Latin, Big C. They're from Latin America. And we're talking about baseball starting up pretty soon, but that's a big issue. How can sports people make more noise about it since people like CNN and Fox News, they kind of skirt around the issue, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, you talk about baseball starting up, Charlton, but we've never heard a word about hockey.
That's true.
Mainly Caucasian ladies.
Yeah.
And think about how many Eastern Europeans, Charlton, play in the NHL.
That's a lot, yeah.
And then you talk about getting rid of them, putting a travel ban on these Eastern Europeans who play in the NHL. Because of the way they look like everybody else, they just don't talk like everybody else, okay?
Yeah.
You even look into the NBA, Charlton, and there's a handful of players in the NBA, Charlton, that are from these banned countries.
Yeah.
So how are they going to migrate back and forth? What about their families who want to come to America?
Yeah.
Are they going to be labeled criminals? They can't come to America now and visit and watch NBA games. And you speak about baseball, which is going to have a huge infusion of Latin American players, Charlton,
exactly.
all over the Caribbean.
Yeah.
And so how are they going to be looked at? The NFL has a handful also, Charlton.
Yeah.
So sports is being infested by these bans that are being put out that are put out unthoughtfully, Charlton.
Yeah.
There's no tag behind it. Let's just throw it out after these people.
Yeah.
And you might as well say these people. This is not a ban on problems in America.
Right.
None of these countries have never had problems in America. Just say this is a racial profiling ban.
Oh, it is.
I mean, it would be better if he was honest and say we're racially profiling people right now.
Well,
we don't want this ethnicity of people in America. Stop saying this is vetting.
In the land of the free and the home of the brave. It's interesting. I heard in the Major League Baseball commissioner, Mr. Manfred, and he was talking about how to shorten the game of baseball. But I do think that he could step up and be more like, the NBA commissioner and realize that if you have an opportunity to speak about what keeps your athletes safe and keeps their families safe. For the intelligent people, we got to speak up, because if you're ignorant, you don't read, you're probably just going to watch football and basketball and baseball and not even have a clue to what's going on in our society. But it would be great if we had someone like Manfred speak out about not just shortening the game of baseball, but how to stop the racial profiling against a lot of people who play baseball in the majors that come from Latin America. If you're good enough to make the majors, great. But what about their families and the people that's left behind? They're all coming here, and they're all under the tutelage of Manfred because he's the commissioner of baseball, and he could find a way to speak out against what's happening to our Native Americans and also our Mexican population. Would that make any sense? He is a sports guy, and a lot of sports guys in Major League Baseball are affected by that garbage, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, when you think about it, most of these Latin American players who come in are in their teens and early 20s.
Yeah.
When they come to America. So why is it that, you're going to turn a blind eye on some rich white owner possessing another minority player for whatever amount of money that they pay him?
Yeah.
What's the difference in that? I mean, you talk about locking up the immigrants that come into this country, Charlton. I don't see you levying any fines on the farms or the fast food places that employ them. The employer is the culprit, not the immigrant that's coming here seeking a better life.
Yeah.
It's the employer who does not pay them fair wages, and Donald Trump has been one of them.
Yeah.
You can't tell me that he's paid fair wages to every groundskeeper and every maid that he's had on his properties, Charlton, over the decades.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
He has been one of them under the table payers, not paying taxes on the money that he pays them out of his back pocket because he can't have that much money around. But here it is. You're not punishing the people that should be punished.
Yeah.
These people will call INS in on payday.
Yeah.
Have the whole crew rounded up where they don't have to pay anybody. They've gotten a week's worth of free labor or 2 weeks worth of free labor. Call in INS, the whole crew runs.
Yeah.
So it's been unfair treatment by the Americans towards the minorities coming into this country, Charlton, to help feed the Americans who live here.
Well, Big C, I mean, I would say that this segment is also sponsored by Big C Sports Insurance. It's called Ben and Mark Insurance. We cover athletic and events and sporting events all over the country, and we cover it for professional teams, college teams, as well as your high school teams, and even your mom and pop organizations. And we are in all 50 states. So again, follow Big C Sports on the iHeartRadio network every Monday through Friday at 5 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time, worldwide on the iHeartRadio network. And I want to say this too, because the Oscars is coming up, and we have so many people that are up for awards, and I hope that Hollywood can tie into what's going on. I know even on almost every sports show now, they have a segment for Hollywood, the way you started back last year, Big C, as we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary of Big C Sports, and you started that, when you started talking about Hollywood actors and actresses, and you did something. I think you talked about the great Dick Gregory and how smart he is. You talked about the great Harry Edwards and then Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So Hollywood and sports goes together, and I think those factions together can at least talk about how it's affecting the diversity in their industries when racial profiling is being not even questioned. It's like they talk about it for 2 minutes and then it goes by the wayside. But these prisons, Trump's administration, they're building them, and it's being backed by private money. Hopefully Hollywood will talk about that. Big C, can we expect anything out of Hollywood for the Oscars talking about this? Your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, there's always going to be backlash, but I think this will be quite quiet politically, Charlton, because so many benefit from it, at the labors of others.
Yeah.
And that's the sad part of America. America's been built on the backbone of people that are less achieved. When they arrive here, they've been the labor for those who have had over the years. I mean, it's like even when we talk about the president, we talk about his golf course.
Yeah.
I would like to see how many guys out there that are trimming their heads and walking around the leaf blowers, racing the sand traps that look like him.
Yeah.
I would beg that. How many maids in this hotel look like his wife? Okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are the things. Those are the questions you have to ask. How many people look like his kids that work for him on a manual basis in the casino that he has had, doing the laundry, doing the dishes, doing the bus table.
Yeah.
Those are the things you have to look at. So when somebody wants to talk about American made, in his hotels, where do fruit and vegetables come from? They're not coming from America, Charlton.
Yeah.
He's buying those things from a third world country. Getting them cheap.
Yeah.
Okay?
That's true.
Talk about the linen in the hotel. That's coming from India.
Yeah.
It's not coming from America. You're not buying American-made sheets. They cost too much.
Yeah.
So, you have to be honest. When they say the buck stops here, the lie should stop there also, Charlton.
Well, Big C.
And be honest with America where you bringing your goods from.
Yeah, and see, that's very important, because we love baseball, and they're starting to start the spring training coming up here and next month. I'm looking at the great Pete Rose, and we know that there's been so many good and bad stories about Pete Rose, good as an athlete, and then bad when it comes to being, getting into the Hall of Fame. But the Philadelphia Phillies, they have him on their Wall of Fame ballot, and I think that's important because if you think about Pete Rose and what he's accused of doing, whether you bet on baseball or not, I wasn't there, but everybody...
Show me how many athletes
have not.
They played it and haven't played it. I mean, you got politics. Everybody everybody bets on sports.
Yeah.
It's just like we just had the Super Bowl, Charlton.
Yeah.
There was 5 times the amount of money bet outside of Vegas than what it was in Vegas.
Yeah.
So you're going to tell me everybody that's not bet on sports? I mean, you know, you can bet. Yes, he may have had control of some games, maybe
right.
lose with pitches or whatever, all, but he didn't have control of the bats when the guys are up at bat, Charlton. You know, it's just like when teams would walk Barry Bonds.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Barry Bonds would have hit 900 home runs if he had had all those intentional walks in his career.
Yeah.
But no one talks about that. They say, well, you know, he was juiced. Okay, what were the managers in the other dugout and the pitchers on the mound?
Maybe the pitchers were juiced. Yeah.
They were just not giving him the ball. You know, if he's that bad of a hitter,
yeah.
If he's that good, you're scared of him walking. So, you know, if you look at his home run to bat ratio,
yeah.
add that to the number of walks that he had in his career. When people want to talk about Bonds is not greatness,
yeah.
he is as great as great could ever be.
Yeah.
It's just the problem is he bypassed Babe Ruth in a landslide. Then he beat Hank Aaron, who they didn't like, who beat Babe Ruth.
Yeah.
And they had nothing to say that otherwise he didn't play the game clean, but he never failed a drug test.
Yeah.
It would be like putting Donald Trump on a what's that little machine that makes you tell the truth.
I understand.
If you brought one of those to the White House, it's called Secret Service.
Yeah, that's funny, Big C. That's funny. I want to say this last 5 minutes is sponsored by United Labor Guaranteed Life Insurance up to $100,000 with no medical questions. And also that means Rush Limbaugh can get covered. Even Donald Trump, if they try to get rid of Obamacare, you know he can't pass a physical, Big C. He just can't. I don't see him running a mile and not passing out, Big C. Maybe even a half mile without passing out. You can get that with also Big C Sports. We are endorsed by the American Cancer Society and the American Heart Association. We also work with all other unions in the United States under the AFL-CIO because we want to keep our union members strong and healthy. And also you can tweet out to Big C Sports on the iHeartRadio network. Also looking to hire over 1,000 licensed insurance agents. Big C, the game last night that was so incredible at the Coliseum last night in Oakland, watching Golden State fall behind to the LA Clippers. I think they were in the hole by 16 points. And then Steph Curry went crazy with the rest of the Warriors. They scored 50 points in the third quarter and ended up winning that game by double digits. Did that just knock the Clippers, their confidence? Is it knocked out of the box now, even when they have to face Golden State again, or is it just a game, Big C? Your thoughts?
No, this is them serving notice on not just the Clippers, but the rest of the division, Jonathan, that we are who you thought we were.
Yeah.
And this shows that a team is constantly evolving, getting better and better. Just when people think that the Warriors have plateaued, Jonathan,
yeah.
No, all of a sudden they find another steep peak to go up.
Yeah.
And that's what they're doing. You know, they don't have to rely on one play each night. You know, if you think about 2 years ago, everyone said Steph Curry.
Yeah.
Last year was Klay Thompson and Steph Curry. Now it's like whoever's got the ball in their hands.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, you call them the Golden State Warriors, but you can actually call them Dangerous Inc.
Yeah.
That's how dangerous they are.
That's true, Big C. And so at that pace that they play, and I think Steph Curry even shot a 30-foot basket for a three and win, and he was covered actually. And everybody talks about Golden State not having the toughness inside, but they went up against a team that has DeAndre Jordan, who's very physical, and even Griffin, who's physical, and it just didn't seem to stop them, Big C. So that's going to be really difficult if they get everything going in the playoffs. But also, we talked about Houston, and Houston had a great game against New Orleans. And even though they had DeMarcus Cousins and Davis and people are looking for them to mesh, it might take them a couple of games to settle in. But Houston can shoot the three ball like nobody, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, you knew when Cousins showed up that, you know, he was going to do what he had been doing in Sacramento. You know that, Charlton?
Yeah.
He was going to lose. All right? And so Houston was not worried about him. You know, you got a great backcourt in Houston, led by that Matador point guard that they had.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah.
You know, he wants to let you go by so he can get the ball back in his hands.
Yeah.
Every day of the week.
That's funny.
So this is a team that's been together. You know, now New Orleans has to find where do they fit, Charlton. Where does Cousins fit in the organization?
Yeah.
How does he and Davis play together if they can?
Yeah.
You know, and if they can, how long? I don't see that relationship lasting, Charlton. I see one of those players moving.
Yeah.
And Los Angeles, you know, is not that far away by plane.
Yeah, that's true.
So, you know, so I see this
Yeah.
But at the end of the season, one of those players has to move, Charlton. It would be great for the Lakers to get either one of them.
Yeah.
I think that environment down there would help either one of those players evolve. But as a tandem, it's hard to play big men together, Charlton. There's been an illustrious history of big men playing together in the NBA.
Yeah.
But not all of them have been successful. When you think about the tandem of big men that have won championships, Charlton, there's been far and few in between. And people think, wow, all these big men around the league, how many of them played back-to-back together and won championships? They have not existed. Tim Duncan and the Admiral Charlton were on the same team together, for a little stretch.
Yeah.
But when you look around the league, there's really been no other tandem. Olajuwon and Sampson didn't win until Sampson was gone.
Yeah.
You look at in Detroit, even though Wallace came in when they won a championship, but they had someone else playing center. They had Ben Wallace.
Yeah.
So they had two Wallaces on the team, but the shorter of the one, so they really didn't have two twin towers. One played out on the wing, Charlton.
Yeah.
So it just hasn't really worked. Nate Thurman and Wilt Chamberlain, one of them had to go. So over time, it hasn't been the best of combinations. Robert Nash and McHale worked well together, 7'6'11".
Yeah.
In Boston, but when you look up and down the league throughout its history, Charlton, teams that have tried to back in two big men on the court at the same time, it just hasn't been cohesive.
Well, Big C, that's a very good point. The last thing I'll just get your opinion on, last night watching TNT, and they have, of course, the great Shaquille O'Neal, and they have Charles Barkley. They actually have I think it's going to...
Sound like the buffet crew.
Yes, that was the buffet crew. But they had Garnett, and they had Rasheed Wallace, and they had them in their own room, just giving their ideas of what big men do, and because they didn't retire with the teams they started with, Big C. They've moved around, and Wallace was up in Portland, and he also played Detroit. And we know Garnett, he was up in Minnesota and won his championship with the Boston Celtics. But I like the idea they took the time to have some guys that actually played the game at the highest level and give them about 2 or 3 minutes to talk about what they see going on. You talked about earlier how if maybe some big guys could listen to Kareem, they would learn a lot. I think TNT, I want to give them a home run or at least a slam dunk for that last night because they have guys who've been there who played against the best competition, and they're giving their critique. It's not just some guys on TV. Your thoughts? I think that's a good move, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, it is. And you talk about both of those players, Charlton. Both of them at one point played in Boston, at the latter part of their career.
Yeah.
They both, ironically, did retire with the teams that drafted. Rasheed retired as a Trailblazer, and Garnett retired as a Timberwolf.
Yeah.
But, in your trials and tribulations in that game of basketball, you are forced to move at times.
Yeah.
But to sit there and have these guys that have played at the highest level, Charlton, who have the NBA championships, who understands the struggle of being with not such a good team, and both of them went through that, Charlton, in their early years. But they stayed there and they had fortitude, Charlton. And I think in Rasheed's case, he had that ability to go out and interact with others. Because he played in North Carolina. He played under Dean Smith.
Yeah.
He spent 3 years in college, so he had some maturity about it. Kevin Garnett was just that freak who came out of high school.
Oh, he's a stud.
Who spent 21 years in the NBA straight out of high school.
Yeah.
But he developed. He was in a place, Charlton, that really helped him mature by being in Minnesota, a small market, and being the only horse in town. In the wintertime, you couldn't go anywhere anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
So you didn't have time to go out and get in trouble.
Yeah, too cold.
You stand out like a sore thumb out there. So, that really helped Garnett over his years. He was mature beyond his years. But to have a situation like that with TNT, to bring in these veteran players to sit up and talk about themselves, but help talk about how the league can help develop these younger players and what the league and team should expect from them. That's what should be an ongoing series. It's not about the guys showing how they live and the cars that they drive, but how, as you spoke about with Kareem, how can these older players bring it back to the game and not worry so much about these young flamboyant announcers and reporters beating up on players?
Well, Big C, I think that's a very good statement. I hope we'll see more of that coming on future shows, and even baseball as well as the NFL. And as I always say, every Monday through Friday at 5 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time worldwide. Follow Big C Sports on the iHeartRadio network, the #1 network in the United States. and also a Big C Sports that wrote it, the #1 sports show in the universe. We're the only show that does it freestyle, and we always want to say there's never any excuse for domestic violence. If you see any woman going through that garbage, please call 911. She shouldn't have to go through that garbage on her own. And also, as we tell you, every Monday through Friday at 5 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time worldwide, we thank you, we appreciate you, and we hope that you have a super fantastic day.